Here today for some incredible panelists today, and of course our good friend and featured keynote speaker, Perrin Beatty. I want to thank the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region for being our title sponsor today and partnering with us all through the year to bring this important topic to the forefront. Also to our friends at Delta Waterloo for their hospitality. As we get started, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Attawandaran, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples as we seek a renewed relationship based on the foundation of mutual understanding and respect. I'd just like to introduce a few folks and welcome a few individuals in the audience today. First, my colleague, he doesn't often come across the 401, but Greg DeRocher from the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce is here, so let's give him a Greg and I partner together on a number of different events, and he's very supportive of the work that we're doing with the Immigration Partnership. Regional Chair Karen Redmond's with us today. City of Waterloo Mayor Dave Jaworski, he's going to have to dash out to another meeting, but thank you for coming. The Township of Woolwich Mayor Sandy Shantz, and she's going to be on our panel. Thank you, Sandy. We have the CAO from the Region of Waterloo, Mike Murray's with us today. Michael, thank you. The new city manager for the City of Cambridge, who was at the City of Waterloo, everyone starts in the City of Waterloo and goes somewhere else, Dave Calder from Cambridge. We have Waterloo Regional Councillors Jim Erb and Elizabeth Clark, I think, are here today. Elizabeth's there, and I don't have my Bible. Where's Jim? Jim's somewhere. And Tom Galloway as well. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Wilmot Township Councillor Jennifer Fenning. Where's Jennifer? Thank you for joining us. Waterloo City Councillor Diane Freeman, my old colleague. Thank you for coming. Tony Lamantia, who is one of our panelists from the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. Also like to introduce Martha George. I saw Martha from the Grand Valley Construction Association. Thank you for joining us. And Kelly McManus from the University of Waterloo, who also happens to be the chair of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us. Two other guests that are fitting with our keynote speaker today, one being Ted Arnott. He, of course, is the MPP for, is it Perth? Where's Ted? Perth? Like I said, Wellington, Halton Hills. And he also is the Speaker of the Ontario Legislature and a longtime friend of Perrin Beatty, so welcome and thank you for joining us today. And an even longer-term friend, I think, happens to be my dad, but the Honourable Walter McLean, who served in Parliament with Perrin about 127 years ago. Yeah. A couple of quick items before we get started. Please make sure you visit the Immigration Partnership table at the back of the room. Today's event is also intended to get your ideas on what an immigration strategy for Waterloo Region would and should look like. There are some cards on each table. We hope that you'll take the time throughout the event to provide some feedback. At the end of the event, you can leave them at your table and we'll collect them, and the partnership staff will collect them. We're going to get started with Karen is going to come up. I think Perrin's had something to eat. So if I can now introduce Karen Spencer. She is the Immigration Partnership Council Chair to the stage to help introduce today's keynote speaker. Karen.
Thanks, Ian. It's a pleasure to be here. The Immigration Partnership and the Chamber have been partners now for a number of years, and we're very pleased to be partners in presenting this luncheon today. So Waterloo Region is a community of immigration. For more than 10 years, the Waterloo Region Immigration Partnership has brought together the business community, community organizations, area municipalities, our post-secondary institutions, and residents of Waterloo Region. Together, we have implemented collaborative strategies to facilitate the successful settlement and community involvement of immigrants and refugees living in the region. And something that is really near and dear to the partnership is to really promote and highlight the benefits that immigrants make to our community here in Waterloo Region. Today, more than ever, immigration is a powerful force in the life of Waterloo Region, and in particular, the economy. The Conference Board of Canada projects a 1.6 million person gap between the number of people leaving the workforce and the number of people entering over the next 20 years. In our work with employers across the region, we hear the pressures this is already causing. Strong immigration is needed to help the bridge that gap and ensure a thriving economy and community. But how do we help immigrants who are already here settle, work, and belong in a changing landscape? What is the role of employers, the business community, and our municipalities? Because everyone has a role. How do we ensure that those who come and stay in the long term? And how do we continue to attract new immigrants to come here into the future? These are the types of challenges we seek to address via the Immigration Partnership. And so I am very pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker. The Honourable Perrin Beatty is the President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of Canada's largest and most representative national business association with over 200,000 members. Prior to joining the Canadian Chamber in August of 2007, Perrin held the same role at Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. He's from Southern Ontario, a descendant of one of Canada's most prominent manufacturing families. He grew up in Fergus and studied at the University of Western Ontario. And I won't say the year.
I think the word is attended as opposed to studied.
Perrin was first elected to the House of Commons as a Progressive Conservative in 1972. During his 21 years in Parliament, he served as Minister in 7 different portfolios, including Treasury Board, National Revenue, Solicitor General, Defense, National Health and Welfare, Communications, and External Affairs. I say that's just an amazing wealth of experience. In 2018, he was made an Officer of the Order of Canada for his lifetime of public service and for his devotion to the development of our nation as a community leader and corporate visionary. Following his keynote, Perrin will participate in a fireside chat conversation moderated by Tara Bedard, Executive Director of Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Perrin Beatty to the stage.
Well, Karen, our elected representatives, thank you to all of you for coming out today. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, thank you, first of all, Karen, for the very, very kind introduction. It's the sort of introduction, though, that you dread when you discover that the person introducing you has covered all of the topics that you want to cover, done so more succinctly and more articulately than you're going to be doing. It was a very gracious introduction, and I just want to reinforce over the course of the next while some of the themes that you brought up. If you'll bear with me, let me talk about for a second just about something that you didn't ask me to talk about. Because of the presence here of 2 very close friends of mine, the Honourable Walter McLean and Ted Arnott. We have, the Canadian Chamber, like your chambers, is completely nonpartisan. We don't endorse political parties, we don't endorse leaders or candidates, but we do put forward our views on what policies are good for Canadians as a whole. For us, the election was in many ways very disappointing, and I'll come back to that during my remarks, because of the lack of discussion about issues which are substantive, which concern all of us. The other reason is that what the election campaign lacked in terms of substance, it made up for in terms of bile and venom. And what we need more than anything else in a country that perhaps is more divided after the election campaign than when we went in is to restore respect and civility to the public discourse. Walter McLean and Ted Arnott demonstrate that that's possible. These are two people I've been privileged to know and to work with over the course of many, many years. I was thrilled when Ted was chosen Speaker of the Ontario Legislature, because there was somebody who was scrupulously fair, who understood the rules, but who also wanted to ensure that every elected representative in the legislature would have a chance to have his or her voice heard and respected. And the Honourable Walter McLean, during the time that we served together in Parliament, represented the highest, embodied the highest values of public service that we could conceive. He's somebody who was always respectful, who always understood the difference between an opponent and an enemy, and who understood there's a difference between being wrong and being evil. And too often that distinction is lost on people in public life today. So these two people are really exemplars of the best virtues, and we hope that members of Parliament from all political parties will put aside the theater of the campaign now that the election is behind us, and we'll focus on what's best for Canada, and we'll restore a tone of civility. And I might add that element of civility, of respect for points of view that are different from our own, is something that is characteristic of this region of Ontario as well. It's an important contribution that you make to the public discussion, and it's something that will be more important than ever before as we look at where we go as a country from here. So I say to our elected representatives at the municipal level, thank you for your contribution, and also for the example that you set for all of us. Well, let me talk about what you actually did ask me to talk about as well. I was delighted when Ian from the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, along with the Immigration Partnership, invited me here today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this afternoon. I'm here because for more than a decade, I've had the privilege of leading the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, which has been the voice of business in Canada since 1925. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, our network consists of 450 chambers of commerce and boards of trade, including the ones that Ian and Greg represent, from right across Canada, and a number of corporate and association members. Altogether, the Canadian Chamber represents 200,000 businesses from every sector in every part of the country. Now, the energy and commitment of Canada's business communities is inspiring today as it was when I joined the Canadian Chamber 12 years ago. They serve as an important reminder of what we in the Chamber movement do and who we do it for, and why it matters so much to our country. Yet, as I was mentioning earlier, it seems as if we were largely alone in thinking about our economic future in recent weeks. The recent federal election campaign was notable, unfortunately, for the lack of discussion on these critical issues. And yet there were important issues that needed to be discussed. Instead, the parties, all of the parties, let Canadians down by focusing on side issues, by engaging in silly squabbles, and by fighting over personalities. The Canadian Chamber's platform for prosperity highlighted some of the critical questions that should have been debated. It was developed in consultation with the provincial and territorial chambers, and it drew upon our own national AGM resolution process. It set out some of the key topics that we think have to be examined if we're to ensure that Canada can attract and grow the businesses that create a brighter future for Canadian families. We outlined priorities alongside a series of specific recommendations to attract investment to Canada, to help business create jobs, to grow and to strengthen our communities. We focused on 7 key areas: taxation, regulation, trade, small business, a connected Canada, pharmacare, and last but not least, the reason I was invited here today, building a workforce for the 21st century. It's imperative that we develop agile policies to help Canada meet the demand for a broad range of skills required for the economies of today and tomorrow. An essential part of Canada's workforce needs is immigration. It is critical for us if we are going to ensure that we don't literally have a shrinking workforce in this country. All new net growth in our workforce in Canada in the foreseeable future is going to come from immigration. And if we want to grow our economy, it's going to be critical for us to be able to attract the skills of people from around the world to help us build this country. Not only is it critical for us, though, to meet the needs of our employers, but it also gives us an important competitive advantage in dealing with the rest of the world. And I want to just digress from my notes briefly on this because it's a point that needs to be underscored. We are blessed in this country by the diversity of our population. It's, having grown up in this area, I grew up in a community where most people were Scottish, of Scottish ancestry. They're very tolerant to those of us who came from Ireland, back some generations ago. Waterloo Region was known for people of German descent, and both communities celebrate that heritage and still maintain that unique character of where the original settlers came from. But the communities and all of our country have been strengthened immeasurably by people who've come from all countries around the world to help us make our communities stronger and to help build a better country. Very few countries in the world could say, as we do in Canada, that in our largest city, half of the population wasn't born in this country. That we have one of the most diverse populations anywhere in the world, and that it works. That people of different backgrounds, different political views, different nationalities, different religions work together in harmony and peace and feel a sense of common purpose in terms of what they want to achieve for themselves and for their families and for their country. This is a tremendous business advantage that we have in Canada. A few years ago, I heard a speech by Richard Florida, the professor, who was the author of the book, The Rise of the Creative Class, and then subsequently the Flight of the Creative Class. And his argument is that the most important resource that we can have is not physical, it's the intellectual capacity of people who increasingly are mobile and able to move anywhere in the world and to make a living there. And the issue is, how do we attract those best minds to come to our country? And what Professor Florida said was that he had looked at Canada, and particularly at the GTA, on the basis of a number of different comparators, and said the single most important competitive advantage that Canada had, and particularly the GTA, was in its diversity. That for the same reason as Silicon Valley was successful in attracting the best minds, because what they were saying is, it's come as you are. We want you as you are to bring your unique skills and perspectives. That's what Canadians have said as well, and particularly in this part of Canada, that diversity is in itself a form of strength for us and enriches us. And this means that in this country, we have every country's first-generation diaspora speaking the language, understanding the culture, with a network of friends and family back home, and people who are entrepreneurial by nature, that they gave up everything that they had to make a new life in this country. This is a rich resource for us as we're looking about how can we take Canada and integrate this country into the global economy in a successful way. It's a resource that other countries can't claim the way that we do in Canada. And another key resource that we have, another key element that is so important, is that when you poll in Canada, what you find is that the average Canadian, a majority of Canadians, see immigration as a source of richness for Canada, that we are better as a result of immigration. That's not the case when you poll around the world. And it means then that we do have the ability, at a time when doors are closing elsewhere, when societies are turning inward, we have the capacity to reach around the world and say, we need you here in Canada, we want you here to help us to build this country. That is a tremendous advantage for us. We have the potential, if we do it right. Throughout all of my lifetime, we've been focused on the so-called brain drain from Canada. What's happening as our young people move away from Canada? We have the potential at this point in our country, because of a combination of what we do right here and what some others may be doing wrong, of having the greatest brain gain in our lifetimes, if we are wise enough to take advantage of that. This is a wonderful potential for us. We're seeing it. Ask the universities here, and ask Conestoga College about the grade point averages of international students who are applying for admission to educational institutions here. I remember a few years ago, I went with the Governor General on a state visit to Asia, and I was in Singapore and picked up a copy of the Straits Times, the newspaper. On the top was a banner headline that said, "Future Unlimited, get an Australian university degree." What impressed me was, first of all, that it was clear that the Australians saw education as an export commodity that would bring benefits to Australia. Two, that they were successful in doing common branding for Australia, something we're not good at in Canada, getting everybody to come together and giving one message. And three, that they were committing themselves to making a major investment in terms of promoting higher education as an attraction for Australia. So when I came back, I spoke to the Australian High Commissioner and I asked her, what is it you folks are doing right that we can learn about? And her response was, you have exactly the same advantage in Canada as we have in Australia, but you just don't realize it. I asked her, what do you mean? She said, if you're looking at sending your son or daughter to be educated to the other side of the world, the first question you ask is not, where will they get the best education? The first question you ask is, where will they be safe and made feel welcome? And then having made that decision, you look for what is the best educational institution for them to enroll in. This is a great advantage for us in Canada in being able to attract people with the sorts of skills that we'll need for the future. The Canadian Chamber's key recommendation vis-a-vis immigration in our platform Prosperity is for the federal government to replicate the Atlantic Immigration Project in rural areas across the country. Let me tell you a bit about that. Initially launched as a 3-year pilot in March 2017, the Atlantic Immigration Project has been extended to December 2021. The goal of the program was to ensure the long-term retention and integration of newcomers in Atlantic Canada to help drive economic growth. The program brought an important focus to addressing the challenge of retaining workers who grow their skills in rural areas. It also helped to develop meaningful ways of attracting and retaining skilled immigrants and international graduates to meet the unique workforce needs of the region. Our colleagues in Atlantic Canada would admit that the program got off to a slow start, owing to a lack of awareness outside of urban areas and a steep learning curve as they attempted to navigate an assortment of bureaucratic processes. It wasn't until just this last year that it really gained traction all across the Atlantic provinces. Now, data from the first quarter of 2019 indicates that there were some 1,900 designated employers in the Atlantic region who had made almost 4,000 job offers to skilled foreign nationals or international graduates. Now, the top hiring sectors have been accommodation and food services, manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, healthcare and social assistance, professional, scientific and technical services, and retail. Now, as my colleague Sherry Somerville, who's the CEO of the Atlantic Chamber, always highlights, it takes committed partners and an active ground game to achieve these results. Sherry's team, along with Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada and the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency and governments of the Atlantic provinces, participated in almost 1,000 meetings, industry events, career fairs and information sessions with regional employers and international student advisory groups throughout the Atlantic region. And it was that work on the ground that was required for the program to really take off. Now, building on the Atlantic pilot program, and in a further effort to spread the benefits of economic immigration to smaller communities, the federal government launched its Rural and Northern Pilot Project in March 2019. 11 pilot communities from Ontario to British Columbia were selected, including Brandon, Manitoba, Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Claresholm, Alberta, Vernon, BC, and Sudbury in Ontario. Recognizing the importance of labor market integration to newcomer success and the critical role of business, community applications for the rural and northern pilot project needed to be led by a local chamber of commerce and/or economic development organization. As these pilots get off the ground through the end of this year and into next, the Canadian Chamber is organizing quarterly calls among our network so they can share insights and experiences with each other. We want to shorten the program's time to success through peer learning and through sharing best practices. Now let's turn to this region, Waterloo Region. The region has seen a steady rise in immigration over the past decade by about 10% to approximately 3,200 permanent residents annually. For perspective, this figure is about a third of the number that Winnipeg and Edmonton accept, half of what cities like Ottawa, Saskatoon, and Regina welcome, and about on par with Hamilton and Halifax. That's a good track record. Yet, are Kitchener-Waterloo and regions across the country doing enough to welcome new Canadians into their communities? I would argue that we could all do more. That too often in Canada, what we do is we say, welcome to Canada, the door is open, we're glad to have you here, now you're on your own. What we need to do is to go well beyond the entryway and focus on what we can do. Do we have the infrastructure in place in our communities that allows newcomers to Canada to be able to participate fully in our society and in our economy? Still, we see the impact that people with similar skill sets and experience and educational levels coming to Canada pay an immigration penalty compared to those of us who are born here. And too often, we are leaving people's skills sitting on the table and underemploying people for the jobs that employers need to have filled. To think well beyond simply how do we persuade people to come to the country, to what do we do after people come here, and how do we ensure that the whole experience is one that is successful. We have to do so. We have to do better, because we have historically low unemployment rates, 5.5% as of September 2019, and the number of job vacancies sits at more than 500,000 across the country. Year after year, our members indicate that labor shortages are a top issue in their communities, and they're often the most pressing problem that they face. Canada currently has low unemployment rates combined with unprecedented job growth. With the country's aging population, low fertility rates, and labor mobility challenges, the issue will certainly persist and in fact worsen in coming years. I hear it everywhere. Skilled labor is not only a real challenge at a local level, it's also a critical issue for Canadian competitiveness. What our members are feeling on the ground is supported by a broad set of data. Consider that over the next decade, between 2019 and 2029, the mining industry will need more than 100,000 workers across the spectrum of roles, including supervisors, foremen, and trade occupations. Between 2015 and 2035, we can expect a cumulative shortage of 240,000 workers in the tourism sector. Between now and 2030, there will be a gap of 123,000 agricultural workers. Between now and 2025, the aviation and aerospace sector is facing a labor shortfall of 55,000, with the greatest demand being for pilots and aircraft maintenance engineers. And over the next 3 years, Canada will need between 5,000 and 8,000 cybersecurity workers. Interestingly, in the tech sector, the initial shortage of IT professionals was originally estimated as 200,000 employees by 2020. However, the shortage is not as acute as first anticipated, thanks to a number of factors, including the Government of Canada's Global Talent Stream. This program, which was piloted 2 years ago and made permanent this past spring, was designed to increase the number of work permits in key skilled professions while decreasing their processing time. It's being used by more than 1,500 employers and welcomed by more than 6,500 people. Communitech, from right here in KW, is one of the original organizations designated as a referral partner for the pilot. Similarly, the Waterloo Region Economic Development Corporation became a partner in summer of 2018. And this serves as an excellent example of the importance of immigration to Canada's workforce and the ability of the federal government to effectively develop and implement policy when we work together. Nonetheless, Conference Board of Canada data indicate that between 2018 and 2040, 11.8 million Canadians will leave school and become workers versus 13.4 million exiting the workforce. What we have is a major gap that needs to be filled. In its report, Can't Go It Alone, the Conference Board argues that immigration will remain a critical solution, accounting for all of Canada's net labour force growth and 1/3 of the economic growth rate between 2018 and 2040. The Canadian Chamber and our own members understand this reality, and we've understood it for a long time. We wholeheartedly support immigration, with a priority on economic integration and labour market integration. And we focus on 3 main areas for our advocacy work. The first is to strengthen services to permanent residents, a common theme during our national policy resolution process that took place at our AGM in St. John, New Brunswick in late September. A resolution was approved for the Canadian Chamber to advocate that Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada restore funding to open satellite offices with a full range of services in regions or cities where the intake of newcomers over the past 3-year period averaged at least 1,000 newcomers in population growth per year. Excuse me. The network also passed resolutions recommending that the Government of Canada expedite foreign credential recognition, especially in the health, transportation, business, and finance sectors. We also developed policy, thanks Greg. We also developed policy proposals to improve general and occupation-specific language supports and training for immigrants across the country. In addition to that, we'll be asking the federal government to ensure the provision of childcare for language programming so that all newcomers who need it can benefit from language training programs. Secondly, the Canadian Chamber believes that the Government of Canada needs to do more to improve the pathways to permanent residency for temporary residents. We have any number of recommendations related to the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, including enhancing the ability of service providers to engage work permit holders in settlement and labour market programs. We also recognize the value of international students. We believe that they should be able to participate in the Canada Summer Jobs Program and access work-integrated learning opportunities as part of their study permit visas. We see these options as part of a broader, longer-term integration strategy. Third, and equally important, we support the continued devolution of the immigration selection process. Decentralizing immigration selection processes started with the Provincial Nominees Program, followed by the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program, and then the recently announced Rural and Northern Pilot Program. We need to continue moving to more local level of decision-making. We need local solutions built by communities for communities that address community workforce needs, including communities like Waterloo Region. We also believe that such an approach has a greater likelihood of success when the business community, local chambers of commerce, and economic development organizations are integral to the process, and all the better if they're leading the charge. To this end, the Canadian Chamber looks forward to helping the new government deliver on its platform commitment to create a municipal nominee program. Now, at least this part sounds relatively straightforward, doesn't it? Now, unfortunately, it's not. Let me tell you something interesting about the business community and its support for immigration, which is perhaps a little anomaly, if you will. The Ottawa Board of Trade has surveyed its membership on immigration matters over the past few years. In 2019, 85% of respondents said that immigrants are an important source of skills for the local economy writ large. However, only 53% of Ottawa businesses think that immigrants are an important source of skills for their own company. This response indicates a clear disconnect between principle and practice, and we need to close that gap. So what can business, regardless of size and regardless of sector, regardless of location, do to support immigration? Let me give you a few concrete examples. The first and most obvious is hire a new Canadian. Hire two. hire more. It really is that simple. There are more than ample supports through, for example, the Immigration Partnership to walk you through the process, make connections, and to support integration. The second is to talk about it. Spread the word. Underscore the value of new Canadians to your businesses and to the workforce. Push back against fear and against prejudice. Write an article. Post a tweet. Encourage a business colleague. Serve as a champion. Third, we have to keep our eye on long-term retention. What was astonishing to me some years ago was to attend a banquet in Nanning in China, and to find myself beside a woman who turned to me and said, my husband and I are land immigrants to Canada. And I said, well, what are you doing back in China? You came from China, what are you doing back in China? They said, we moved to the Toronto area, and my husband had a university education, and we found that he couldn't find work that would allow him to put his skills to use. So we moved back to China for opportunity. And we need to make sure that when we successfully attract people here, that we keep them in Canada, and that we're able to keep them in the communities throughout the country to which they've come. And that requires work on all of our part. Experience shows that retaining these workers requires a whole of family and community approach. The more involved, the more integrated children and spouses are in the community, the more likely the family is to stay put and to grow roots. At the Canadian Chamber, we've been developing a robust initiative for inclusive growth, fostering business competitiveness, and a strong economic environment that benefits all Canadians, including new Canadians. There are many reasons why this is the right thing to do. Still, there are many more why it's the smart thing to do. The best reason, however, is that it's absolutely mission-critical necessary. It's no longer a question of if we should be doing it, but how we make it happen. Thanks so much. Now's the tough part. We'll park here.
I'll take the comfy middle. Perrin, thank you so much. That was amazing, and I think such an amazing way of summarizing the types of thinking that we try to do as a community through the Immigration Partnership with the broad sector of partners that we bring together. And I've seen you speak a number of times at international or national conferences in Canada on immigration, and you never cease to inspire with your vision for immigration in this country and your compassion for the experiences that immigrants have when they're here. You've touched on pretty much everything that we were hoping to hear today. And so what I think I'd like to do is to just ask a few questions to drill down maybe into some of those ideas a bit more specifically in terms of some really concrete approaches that you are seeing happening across the country that might add to some of the work that we're already doing in this community. But before I do that, we have just come out of the federal election, and you did spend quite a bit of time talking about that. And there wasn't a lot of talk on the policies that were being put forward by the different parties, although it did feature in the written platforms for those of us who took the time to go and have a look prior to voting. So I would just like to ask you if you could share your perspective on how the outcomes of this election will impact how this Parliament and this government see immigration policy, and specifically what you think that means for communities like Waterloo Region from an economic development perspective.
Great. I'm glad you put the question to me, because I'm spending my time these days going out talking about the election to people, and I think I'm cutting a swath of depression across the country as I share my views on where we are post-election. But there's some good news that we should focus on, despite the vacuity of the debate that we had and the lack of civility. And that's that the political parties that are represented in Parliament are all in favor of immigration. None of them said we should be closing the doors. The one party that did suggest doing that was soundly rejected. So the concern, a major concern that I have, is that what we're seeing globally is less of a struggle between left and right than between open societies and closed societies. And you see countries turning inward and seeing engagement with the rest of the world as being a threat instead of being an opportunity. Canadians firmly rejected that, and that's good news for us, because it's good news just in terms of being the sort of civilized society that we want to be. But it's, from a selfish point of view, representing the business community, it's good news for us, because our success in this country in building our economy is going to depend upon our engagement with the rest of the world. So on the positive side, with all of the problems I see with this dysfunctional parliament, where one could argue that we don't even have national parties anymore if you look at the structure of the caucuses of each of the parties. On the positive side is, I think, on the issue of skills, that all of the political parties indicated that they recognized there was a problem and that we need to do more. It's defining the consensus in terms of what we can do together to make it happen, and making sure that government understands they have to work with the educational sector, with community groups, and with business to make it happen. And on the issue of immigration, one of the re-elected cabinet ministers called me yesterday morning, and which I greatly appreciated, that sort of outreach. And she said to me, looking at, we realize you have some concerns about the new parliament, what policies you might see. Where do you see an opportunity for us to work together? I said one of them was, and some of the initiatives that the government was taking in terms of regulatory reform in the last parliament. But the other was in terms of immigration. And that this is not a partisan issue in Canada, and if we work together, for example, we should be going down today throughout the United States where doors have been closing as a result of attitudes in Washington. We should be saying to business, if you will put an R&D facility anywhere in Canada, we will guarantee that we will help you either find a Canadian citizen or bring somebody into Canada to fit those needs. We should be attracting that investment into Canada and using the fact that we're an open society to be able to do it. That's not a partisan issue. It's something that all political parties should be prepared to do. So it's an area where I think we can actually make some difference in a positive way if we work together and if we set aside a lot of the election rhetoric.
And do you think that the idea of a municipal nominee program is likely to take off?
Yeah, I sure hope so. Because what I've heard in going across the country is that one size doesn't fit all. That needs are different from community to community, and that we need to tailor what we're doing. One of the great advantages in Waterloo Region is the civic involvement that's here. It may be part of the church tradition that you've had, or part of the cultural tradition that came down over the years. But this is a community where churches, where community organizations of all stripes get together and they look at what can we do to make people feel welcome, how can we build the community together. This is a great resource. That means that the infrastructure that I was talking about how do you, once somebody comes in through the door, how do you make them feel at home and integrate them fully into the economy, that you've taken that first step. Well, who better to determine what the needs are in this community as we recruit people to come here from the rest of the world than the community itself? Let's decentralize a lot of that authority and get communities themselves more engaged. The other thing we've seen, and I certainly saw it right going back to the time, Walter, when you and I were in Joe Clark's government and we brought in 50,000 boat people from Vietnam, was that it was where communities were engaged, that people were successful in making the transition, where they had gone through hell, and where they're able to start new lives and make such a contribution. We need to get more community involvement in this and have the flexibility to take advantage of it.
I thank you. I'd like to talk a bit about, I think we see on the spectrum when we look at immigration into Waterloo Region and kind of the skills and capacities that new immigrants who are coming here bring into our community. We see some challenges with folks on the spectrum who come in very highly educated with highly professional backgrounds. They speak English very well. And then on the other side of the spectrum, folks who speak little to no English. They don't have that much of a professional background. And with respect to their labor market integration, though, both of these groups having a real challenge to break in initially, and then to grow their professional paths, to grow their family incomes. That growth can be slow for people in kind of both of these groups. I'm wondering if you can speak to some examples that you might have seen across the country of communities or employers who are kind of looking at both of these groups or one of these groups and doing some really good stuff to facilitate that earlier integration and faster growth of income to really maximize the economic contributions that those folks are bringing to communities.
The example I always cite is from Winnipeg, where I think they deal with immigration perhaps more successfully than any other large city in Canada. And a key factor in that was Palliser Furniture, which was founded and run by a person who was a Mennonite. And another advantage that you have in Waterloo Region, it was the Mennonite church that was so much involved in saying, how do we bring people to Winnipeg, despite the winter weather and all of the other challenges, and how do we make them part of the community and make them feel wanted and welcome here? They put that infrastructure in place. They're doing it not only for people who are members of the Mennonite community from around the world, but for, there's high immigration from the Philippines, now increasingly from Africa and elsewhere, and doing it very successfully. So it requires a commitment on the part of business that sees this is a rich source of human resources, human talent. And it requires that sort of leadership, and it requires a partnership. Business shouldn't simply go it alone in your individual business, but you need to partner with other community resources so you have something that's as seamless as possible. You're reinforcing each other and looking at ways to strengthen what you're doing. It's ridiculous. If we go to all of the effort to bring people to the country, and then we find that we're not using their talents, this is dumb. We're leaving human capital sitting on the table and not putting it to work. That's bad business. And we need to get smart about how we do a much better job in terms of recognizing the skills that people have brought and of making it easy for them to use those skills. Tara, what I still remember from some years ago was flying into Mount Hope in Hamilton. The cab driver picked me up. It was the proverbial cab driver that all of us have heard about with the PhD. And he recognized me, said, "What brings you to Hamilton?" I said, "I'm talking to a meeting on skills." He said, "Well, let me tell you about my story." Said, I came here from the Middle East. I was recruited, the Canadian Embassy were encouraging us to come. I went through endless interviews to be able to demonstrate that I had skills that were necessary. And then when I got to Canada, I discovered that my credentials weren't accepted and I couldn't put those skills that I had at home to use. He said, I'm not complaining about what I'm doing, about being a cab driver, because I believe there's a dignity in any work. He said, but I just have one question for you as somebody who used to be in government. Why did you go to all of that effort to persuade me to come and to check out my credentials if you weren't going to let me use those skills once I got there? And I had no good answer for that. We're doing a better job than we did in those days at evaluating people's academic credentials and their skills, but we can do better yet.
You touched on this, I think, when you were talking about kind of the growth of the temporary migration into Canada, and we certainly see that here in Waterloo Region, particularly with the role of our post-secondary institutions in bringing in many more international students than they have in the past, and people who come in on temporary permits be taking more of a multi-stepped approach to immigrating into Canada, maybe coming as an international student, getting a work permit, applying for a temporary or permanent residency, and then eventually probably becoming a citizen. Given that the migration pathways of people into Canada are changing, and with the growth of the temporary migrant population in communities like Waterloo Region, what are some of the things that you are seeing, interesting practices in communities across Canada in terms of working with those groups while they're here temporarily to help facilitate their chosen pathway if they want to stay? And how are communities positioning themselves to be the community of permanent choice for those people?
Let me take it a few steps, a few thousand feet higher than that even, and start, my starting point is business needs skills, and we need skills from around the world. I can't think of a better source of skills than people who are trained in Canada, who speak English or French, who are trained to Canadian standards using Canadian equipment, and who have a network they've developed here in Canada, and who have an interest in being in Canada. A key recruitment pool for us, for Canadian business, should be the international students that we're bringing here, the growing population of international students. I'm a past university chancellor. I was chancellor at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and I used to say that if we had a convocation in the morning and we're graduating international students, if they could pass a security test at lunchtime, I'd give them a work permit by 2. We want to encourage people. We benefit even when people come, have their international education here and go home. We benefit from that, but we benefit that much more when we're able to hold this talent in Canada. So what can we do? Well, first of all, we need to do away with restrictions on any government programs or standards that stand in the way of the ability of an international student to do exactly what a local student would be able to do during their education. If we're arguing, as the Canadian Chamber does, that we should be increasingly look at work-integrated learning for our own students born in Canada, why wouldn't we do the same thing for students, international students coming here, and encourage them to spend part of their time in Canada working in Canadian companies? It's a major source of recruitment then for potential employers. It gives them a sense of how Canadian companies function. It adds value to their education and so on. We can do that and take advantage of it. Now, my pitch to Ian and to Greg is this. The example that was set by the Chamber of Commerce in St. Catharines, working with Brock, where they got together and they said, what we've got is employers looking for people wanting to work, and we have the university here looking to place their students. Why don't we have a joint reception every year held by the business community, sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce, to invite all of the international students to come? What's the cost? The cost is the cost of a beer. And what it does is it gives to the international students exposure to what job opportunities there are in the region, and it gives employers a sense of what sort of skills are out there that they may want to attract. So they're very practical, community-based things that we could be doing to be more successful. And the chamber movement can be an important part of that, working with other partners.
Thanks very much. I see Ian is coming over, so
I think there's a
like we're out of
signal.
time.
He has a hook in his hand.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Perrin.
Tara, thank you.
Yep.
That's lovely. Tara, thank you so much, and thank you all so much for your hospitality.
Thank you, Perrin. That's awesome. Are you going to stick around for Okay. Well, thanks so much, Perrin, for your time. I know you're heading off to another meeting, but we do appreciate your making the time to come down from Ottawa and join us today. Conscious of everyone's time, and to finish off with our panel, I'd like to invite all three of you to come up as I introduce you. Regional Chair Karen Redmond was elected as Regional Chair of Waterloo Region in October 2018. Prior to being elected as Chair, she served on Regional Council as a representative for City of Kitchener, also was MP for 11 and a half years for Kitchener, has been dedicated to public service for her entire life, also served as CEO of Habitat for Humanity. Welcome, Karen. Township of Woolwich Mayor Sandy Shantz was re-elected as mayor of Woolwich Township in 2018, and as mayor is also a member of Regional Council. She began her political career in 1997 as a trustee for the Waterloo Regional School Board and served until 2003, including a term as board chair. She's been a community, served as a community member of Township Council from 2006 to 2010. Thank you for joining us, Sandy. And finally, Tony Lamantia is the president and CEO of the Waterloo Economic Development Corporation. He started as CEO of Waterloo EDC in January of 2016. It only feels like it's been forever, Tony, but it's only been a couple of years, 3 years. Prior to Waterloo EDC, Tony spent over 6 years working at the Ontario Ministry of Economic Development, Employment and Infrastructure, where he was an assistant deputy minister in investment and industry section. He also has a very extensive private sector career as well in a variety of different subject or sectors. So thank you very much for joining us today. Karen, I'll start with you. I mean, Perrin's comments today, there's a number, I mean, I think we all have our takeaways of what were the main themes from his speech, but what stuck out for you as it relates to his remarks and the role that the municipalities are going to play in really achieving, harvesting the talent from refugees and immigrants here in the region of Waterloo?
So I thought Perrin hit a lot of really high notes. I thought he ended on a really high note, which is that this is mission critical. But I would tell you, I don't think it's just for the labor force. I think it's actually for our community. And I think there are a lot of things that we're doing that are right. And we're creating the environment. When people come to a community, they want to see themselves reflected in civil society, and that includes the faith community. And Perrin did touch on the fact that traditionally our faith community has provided those community supports that are so important. I was really pleased to hear him talking about providing ESL as well as childcare, because I don't think that that's something that is always mentioned in sort of in the same context as employment. I think that's really important. One of the things that he didn't say that I think is really critical, and I really do support the work in education and getting a Canadian experience, because that's what you hear so often from highly educated people. The reality is we need immigrants at every level. We need people that are going to do services in the service industry. We need manufacturing, we need advanced manufacturing, and we need the really highly skilled academics who are coming. But the context of the family in other cultures isn't mom and dad and 2.5 children. It's the aunties, it's the uncles. And I think that whole family reunification piece of it is what we're getting more right than a lot of places, and what we have to continue to do, because that really creates the fiber of our community. And that is what has benefited Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge, and the townships. And I mention all of them because we do have that urban-rural balance, and I think that is one of the things that attract people to the secondary migration that we benefit from as well. So we're not only competing on an international stage for talent and investment, but within Canada. And I think that this community sees the benefit of a lot of secondary migration of people that went to Montreal or Toronto and decide they like the quality of life here better. So I think we're responding in a very pragmatic way, which defines Waterloo Region, and I think we need to continue to do that.
Tony, you travel the world with your team to try and draw in foreign direct investment here to the region of Waterloo. You and I talk often about this when we come on the radio show with Greg and I. Invariably, it comes to talent. Talent is one of those things that helps draw businesses to invest here, or the businesses that are already here to grow. So maybe touch a little bit on the role that immigration plays from your perspective as it relates to economic development locally. And I guess as part of that, when people are looking here, they're looking for the talent that's already here or that they have access to. And a big part of that's got to come from immigration increasingly with every passing day.
Yeah, so thanks, Ian. There is, you know, there's no shortage of anecdotes, but I'm going to share one from last week. So we spent a couple of hours with a company called Fair Wholesale. The CEO is a guy named Marcelo Cortez. He comes from Brazil. He went to the University of Waterloo, settled here a number of years ago, worked for Google, then he worked for Square. He actually developed the Cash App that's going gangbusters in the US. And the folks at headquarters said, you need to move your family down to San Francisco if you want to keep working for Square. And he said, all right, I'm not crazy about that, but I'll do that. And he lasted about a month, decided to go north, come back into Waterloo Region, and with a couple of other partners, he started Fair Wholesale. And what's just really cool about this story, so here is a forward-looking, Portuguese-speaking immigrant from Brazil who starts this company with a global mindset 2 weeks ago. They raised their Series C, raised $150 million at a post-money valuation of $1 billion, right? So in downtown Kitchener, we have a new unicorn started by Marcelo Cortez. And, you know, what struck me, Perrin made some comments about what can economic development organizations, communities do to help with orientation and onboarding. Well, one of the things that my team does is they look for, so what we did, because there are a number of companies from Brazil like Matera, Systems, a couple of other, I can't remember the names, but we got the Portuguese-speaking Brazilians together, you know, for beers, right? And they got to, you know, the senior people got to know each other, compared notes on the best Portuguese food in Cambridge and the best pastries, all that stuff. So I mean, these are kind of minor things that we can do, but there are also like these important acts of kindness and heroism that we have nothing to do with. It's the people in the community. And I'm going to share a story that I found out about on Friday. There's a company called My Karma, and they develop software for individual interactions with automotive companies, usually kind of sales, service, all of that stuff. AI based, so there's a lot of data science and technical prowess that goes into the development of the software. We use the Global Skills Program to bring the senior leader here in Waterloo Region to build out the team. His name is Jatin. And they started off like a lot of companies do in May in a workhouse in downtown Kitchener. So he's in the community, brand new to the country, and about a week in, he's cycling from his home to work. He didn't have the right lock on the bike, and the bike got stolen. And I guess word filtered up to the landlord, and the next day the landlord gave him a check for $600, and he said, you know, this exact same bike is for sale, and you know, he recommended a bike shop. I'm probably getting part of this story wrong, but anyway, what I'm getting right is that, what do you think Jatin said to his headquarters? He said, I've just landed in heaven. This is a willing host community for immigration. I love it here. My wife and I are going to build a family here, and we're going to keep growing the team. So this is just a minor example. You know, in the fierce war for talent, and I know I'm being long-winded here. I think we have like an 18-month arbitrage opportunity on the H-1B issue with the United States, and by that I mean, you know, Donald Trump. You know, if he doesn't get reelected, we've got about 18 months to continue to sell the world about the differences, the unique differences we have as being a willing host community. Now, obviously, God forbid if he wins the election, and you know, the benefit for us is there's no short-term arbitrage. We've got 6 years of telling the world. Knock on wood. Yes, yeah, knock on wood. So I think that like a lot of people, you know, my parents are immigrant parents. Being born in this country was like winning the lottery, and I'll just leave it there.
Sandy, your background on school board and from the education sector, and there's many larger business, I think of Conestoga Meats in Woolwich Township. Maybe talk about the connection between the economy, business, and the social side of immigration. I think of education in particular. As Karen said, you're bringing families, and you're bringing, there's a number of aspects that need to be considered when talking about immigration. Maybe talk about the business and economy and the social side.
Sure. Thank you, Ian. I think Tony's last comments, his last illustration, talks about the connection between the economy and the social aspect. If any of you have heard me speak, I often talk about what I think makes community, and I've done a lot of thinking of that from my days on the school board and over time, and I think community happens when you connect with people who are like-minded, but when you connect over and over again in different settings. And that's where I think sometimes the townships are a little different than the cities, where we see the same people over and over again. And so for immigrants coming in, that aspect of community is equally important. So we need to help them to connect with like-minded people and to feel that sense of community wherever they are. Often those places are in the cities. And so the struggle, and I'm maybe not quite answering your question, Ian, but one of the struggles we have in the townships is bringing our immigrants in to work in the townships. They have trouble getting there. Their community is in the city, but we have jobs. We have a lot of jobs in the townships for our immigrants in the agribusiness and in manufacturing. And so that's a challenge that we see, and I think that's really important to connect community and transportation and jobs.
I think that's, it is a whole, you have to look at the whole in terms of transportation and housing and education as well, and I think those are important things for us to consider. Tony, I'm going to come back to you. What is EDC and the municipality, the regional municipality, already doing to move us forward on the immigration file? I mean, you talked about some specific examples, but you must get specific questions around willing host, all of those sorts of things. When you're talking with a business saying, I'm considering investing $100 million, put a new plant, grow a business, what are the things they're talking about specific to immigration and talent that they would ask you about, and what are some of the things you point them towards as it relates to Waterloo Region?
The pitch has to be followed up with real program support, and Perrin mentioned that we're a referral agency to the federal government for the global talent stream. Now, just a note on that. So when I was at the province in my last job, in 2012, my team came up with, as part of the business immigration unit, we came up with investor stream for the temporary foreign workers program. And I really like the comment about decentralizing decision-making for immigration. So we had a number of new investors, companies like Ubisoft, even companies like Toyota that were expanding in Ontario, and we had this really convenient stream under the temporary foreign workers legislation that allowed the province to say, here are companies that need to hire, here are the specific cases, we're going to put them up. And based on the investment, we were able to get very quick approval and a pathway toward permanent residency for these temporary workers. The guts of that became the global talent stream many years later. So it was that kind of provincial innovation that said, look, we've got companies that are expanding, they need to bring talent in from, let's say in the case of Ubisoft, France, to train people for a couple of months. Can we do that? So I think the biggest challenge right now, the provincial nominee programs still exist, but I think there's still sand in the gears, specifically with the global skills program. And we can't all be data scientists and computer software engineers, and there are examples of companies that are in the manufacturing sector. A good example is Racer Machinery in Cambridge. They build lathes and design machines, and actually one of their clients, I can't see who the client is, but it would blow you away. It was a government client, a very important government client. Gave them some, significant work, and they identified 2 people in India who had very specific lathe design machinery skills, and we said, okay, let's put them through the program. But it got caught up in the labor market assessment, and is this really a high skill, and all of that stuff. I mean, we really got to simplify that, and so that the manufacturing sector can hire lead hands, CNC specialists, all of that stuff. I think that would be the single biggest thing they could do, and our organization is an advocate for that. So I'm a big believer in decentralizing, because when we say bring foreign talent here, we actually have to make that convenient and efficient.
Just following That I think one of the things is many of the jobs that are being that you're having success here in advanced manufacturing. It requires trades. It requires not just computer scientists. So this is there's lots of different jobs across skill levels as well. And I think that ease of connecting people is important. Karen. We're very blessed in this region. I think Perrin referenced it, but we got Conestoga College and the two universities. How does the region and individual municipalities, should we be leveraging the strength of those university or those post-secondary institutions to maximize both the economic and the job creation as well as the social benefits of integrating newcomers to the community?
Well, I know all three of the post-secondary education institutions do recruit.
Yeah, hold it up. I think it's just getting feedback.
Getting feedback. Oh.
There, that's good.
It's awful to hear your voice back, just letting you know. And I think they do that vigorously. I think when students come, they do their best to integrate them. I've talked to people who have come for employment to Waterloo Region, and I've talked to students and they decide to stay because they love the quality of life. And I think it's because there's 100 partners as part of immigration partnerships. So I think we need to continue to do that, because when a community responds with one voice for healthcare, for housing, for integration, for community, I mean, we have the multicultural Center. I see Bryce here from the Interfaith Waterloo Region or Grand River. All of that's really important because people live in communities and that's what they're attracted to. I was part of a government delegation that went to Taiwan one time, and we got an hour with the president, and that was unheard of, and it was because his chief of staff had gone to the University of Toronto and he loved Canadians. So you can never underestimate those person-to-person contacts that we have. I think Perrin also talking about the fact that the diaspora globally is represented by people who feel they belong in Canada is really important. But I've talked to people who have come from away to live in Waterloo Region, and what they've said, and I think that this is a bit of a stunning indictment, is that everybody's really nice to you, but nobody invites you home for dinner. So the challenge I would give all of us in this room is whether you belong to a professional association, networking is essential to finding jobs, and that can absolutely be done through the Chamber of Commerce. But if you belong to the Optimist, to Lions, to Rotary, invite those people in, whether or not you work with them, if they live down the street, and help them integrate into that kind of networking and offer them volunteer opportunities, because we're such a community of volunteers. And those connections are those people-to-people connections that I think will really help. And Ian, you touched on housing, and it's a huge issue. We have a very low vacancy rate. We don't have a lot of rental. And those are the kind of markets where when people move to the city and find their sea legs, they need those opportunities. So I think municipalities and the region need to continue to be as cooperative and inventive as we can with our for-profit partners to make sure that those opportunities are there and they can find housing.
Mike Murray and I had a brief chat, and he reminded me that he said, we've come a long way. We got a long way to go, but we've come a long way from when the Chamber actually started the Waterloo Region Immigrant Employment Network, which is the precursor to the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. Now, we've been 10 years as the partnership, Sandy, but we're working on that as a business community, identifying that there were gaps in getting the talent that we needed here in the region of Waterloo, dating 17, 18, 19 years ago. And it really has not ever ended. So with that history, maybe, what's the ideal partnership, or how do we take that collaboration, and what's the perfect state where we take those partnership relationships and between the municipalities, economic development, the community partners, and be able to really welcome and put the immigrant and refugee talent to best use?
Hello? That's a pretty broad question. And I think I'm going to start with something that Perrin said at the very beginning, and he was talking about democracy and listening to our different points of view and doing it with respect. And after that, he said, we need to invite immigrants in, and we need to respect their strengths. And I think we need to respect the conversations that we can have and the points of view and the learnings that we can have from each other. And I think the Immigration Partnership tries to do that. I had to go online before I came here today to see exactly what all they do. And the connection points that are on your website, Tara, are incredible. I just went, I don't know what else they can do. But I do know that from the township point of view, we need to have more discussions to see where those touch points might be, because I don't know where they are.
Maybe that's the way, just in the last few minutes, I'll give Karen a crack at that. I mean, what's a, I don't think there's such a thing as perfect, but what's a goal we should strive for so that we can marry all these pieces together? Because we know, I mean, Greg and I, we talked about this with Perrin when we did our radio interview with them a little earlier. This is the number one issue we deal with every day. I mean, there are lots of issues, transportation and cost of doing business, but the number one issue is talent, and we know that immigration and refugees and putting that talent to use is the number one thing that we have to do for business, but that's also for the community. How do you kind of pull all those pieces together?
Perrin talked about a couple of best practices, and I think we can always do better. Better is always possible, so I think we need to look at that. I think looking at gaps, but I guess just to echo what Sandy said too, is really talk to the people about what are the things they need. And I've always believed that if you do the right things for the best reasons, you're hitting as close to the mark as being as good as you can. And I would say that I think the Immigration Partnership, I think the fact that we've welcomed and integrated refugees into our community over decades. I mean, that's nothing new for us. We've got lots of muscle memory, and it's something, it's tradition we need to continue on. I think the chamber recruiting doctors is really important, because I think Perrin talked about safety, and I see Waterloo Regional Police Services here. I think that's really important. Continuing to reach in the community to say that this is an effort that we do by all of the community. I think healthcare is really important. Education is really important. I think all of those things, there's no one aspect of the community that should be left behind or left out of this conversation. I think all of it's really important in order to keep that competitive edge and help fast track people who can use their skills that they may have acquired somewhere else, or educate them here, whether they stay in our community or even the example that was given about the couple that went back to China. I hope they went back with good thoughts, at least of how the community treated them in Canada.
Any last thoughts? I'll come back to you, Sandy.
Yeah, so last thoughts. I think it would be swell if we figured out as a community, and you know, we're having some conversations about it, what the lead organization is that gets up every day focused on talent attraction, and particularly immigrants. You know, Communitech does some of it. We do quite a bit of it. That's what we were doing last week, to kind of tell folks to come home. But I think that, you know, and by the way, they're coming, right? They are, if you talk to SAP or you talk to Google, something's happened fairly recently in that the talented immigrant flow is starting to really ramp up, and that's a good thing. Hiring has actually become easier. Now, whether it's just two companies, you know, that maybe doesn't make a trend, but for me, like, so they're coming, they're going to be here. How do we make sure, you know, aligned with Karen's comments and what Sandy said, how do we make sure that they feel at home here? You know, once they start working, how do we make sure that they feel connected to the community? And that is, that's something that's definitely worth a huddle. You know, for what it's worth, for anybody who wants to hear Marcelo's story firsthand or talk to SAP, my annual general meeting and public information meeting is November 28th. So a bit of an advert out there, November 28th, 2 weeks from tomorrow at the Accelerator Center. And you're going to hear some wonderful immigrant stories. And it's all about talent, and it's all about prosperity for the region.
Okay, Sandy, final thoughts to you, and before we wrap up.
I would say that my final thought is we need to remember to keep talking together, and that's something that I think we do really well here. We connect the pieces. We have tables that have a variety of organizations that sit at it, social agencies, police services, faith organizations, and we take that for granted, I think, and we have to stop taking that for granted and make sure that we really foster that and nourish that, because it just doesn't occur in other municipalities. So I think that's the most important thing, and if we do that, we will continue to be prosperous.
Listen, thank you all for taking the time today. I think one of the things that I take away from this is maybe when I started 9 years ago at the Chamber, Mike and I and those that were part of the Waterloo Region Immigrant Employment Network were on this issue, but it didn't seem to me that everyone else was. And so I'm very bullish about the fact that you talked about, I think, there's 100 partners that are part of the partnership in one way, shape, or form. And I think that's the positive step, and I think what we've all talked about, Perrin, the three of you, is how do we deepen and strengthen that, because there's going to be more. The numbers are going to grow, and it means our capacity needs to grow as well. So thank you all for being with us today. As a token of our appreciation, I have the same book that we gave to Perrin, actually.
Thank you very much.
It's a book that we did about 4 years ago called County Roots Global Reach, and it tells the story for the entire region from a business perspective. And so you'll see many of the companies that got talked about today that are progressive and leading edge, and so we hope you'll put that on your coffee table and actually read it in good health. So just before we conclude, I wanted to thank our presenting sponsor once again, Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, for their continuing partnership and support in this, for doing this event and raising these issues. We very much value our relationship between the Chambers of Commerce and the Immigration Partnership. Thank you to Delta Waterloo for hosting us, and of course to all of you for attending today. Immigration Partnership has teamed up with the Workforce Planning Board to host a job expo focused on part-time employment. This is a great way for employers to connect with talent to help bridge the workforce gap. The expo is on Thursday, November the 28th. More information is available at the back of the room. In the new year, the Chamber and the Immigration Partnership will be hosting another joint event, this time on investing in your workplace. The event is on Tuesday, January 21st. It'll feature Jennifer Rogerman, who's a lawyer, immigration lawyer, and Bill McGregor from Gowlings. They'll be sharing their experiences in immigration law and discussing the opportunities available to help fulfill talent needs for companies. And finally, in the coming weeks, we'll be hosting our second event in the Provincial Update Speaker Series. Steve Clark, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, which is topical these days. We'll have a date shortly, so stay tuned for that. You can always find more information at greaterkwchamber.com. On your way out, please do leave your name tag for future use, and fill out your feedback card and leave that on the table. Thanks very much for your attendance today, and have a great afternoon.